I'm Michael Popok, and this is unprecedented. We've got the United States Supreme Court trying to figure out whether kids underage should walk around with handguns and be armed under the Second Amendment or not. I mean, to normal human beings, you'd think that's not a good idea. That seems like reasonable, sensible gun control. But with this United States Supreme Court that seems to bend over backwards in order to favor the gun lobby against the interest of average Americans, who knows? There's a new case there. They're considering whether it is legitimate and constitutional to regulate, to keep guns out of the hands of under 21-year-olds. And we break it all down for you right here on Unprecedented on the Legal AFMTN chat. Why don't you update everybody about sort of where this Supreme Court seems to be in the line, drawing the line about gun rights, and why this case, what happened in this case, and why it's not the end of this case.
Well, I mean, I think kind of like what we saw with the Trump immunity decision in the summer. They wrote a really vague uh, new law with the Bruin decision saying that any gun restrictions have to have a basis in history. And of course, our guns were not even close. So you don't have a lot of historical precedent that you can look to. And this is really confusing. It's really confusing to courts, to states, and the Supreme Court is basically having to grapple with the aftermath of putting forward a really broad but yet vague decision. And so what happened was Pennsylvania passed a law that said that 18 to 21-year-olds were not allowed to carry firearms during periods of declared emergency situations. And interestingly, that would have actually helped in the, Kyle Rittenhouse case, right? He ended up, he was able to legally have that firearm because it was a hunting rifle, and he used self defense. So this kind of law in Pennsylvania kind of helps give that a crime in itself is carrying a weapon for those 18 to 21-year olds during those kind of declared emergency times. But of course that was sued, like, this is, there isn't a historical precedent for this, the rights, you're infringing on the rights of these 18 to 21-year olds. The same argument we are hearing over and over from people who want there to be basically like unfettered access to guns in America. So the Supreme Court, though, in this situation, did not reversed the lower court, who said that the ban on 1821s carrying the gun was unconstitutional, reversed that. So basically siding with people here who wanted to regulate the 18 to 21-year-olds. Reversed it and asked the lower courts to review the decision again in light of their most recent gun decisions. So story continues on that one.
Yeah, I'm gonna manage expectations here based on
Mhm.
cases that are similar that came out of Texas. I think this United States Supreme Court is going to find that regulation preventing an 18 to 20-year-old carrying a weapon are unconstitutional. I would be shocked if after they get this case back, if they were declare that I don't think they're going to find that historical antecedent
Mhm. Yeah.
back in the 1880s or old timey or 1790s, whatever the period is, just because the reality is that until more modern era, everybody carried a gun. Women were owned property by their husbands. That's why this whole historical antecedent thing has a tremendous dark side to it, because it doesn't respect that many things in society as they are now were not treated that way then.
Mhm.
Black Americans were slaves, women were chattel and property, so were blacks. And for us to then say, but we like their gun policies. Uh, you that's why they struggled with the domestic violence case related to, should we allow this person that's got a restraining order against him for beating up his girlfriend? Well, let's look at old timey times. Well, old
Yeah.
timey times, women could be murdered by their husbands and not suffer any consequences.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
exactly.
so I don't really understand how this is helping us with a modern appropriate regulation of the right to bear arms. There's a good reason, 18 to 20-year-olds brains aren't properly formed yet. Now, the counter argument is, well, they're holding weapons of war in the military.
Mhm.
So why can't they have one for self-defense? And that is where I think the Supreme Court's going to come down. If they can vote and they can go to war, they can have a gun for self-protection. I'd be shocked, frankly, not because it's right, just because I'm just being predictive off of what I know. If they came down and said, yeah, 18 to 20, sure, no. I mean, maybe 14-year-olds, maybe 15, maybe they'll think minors with malformed brains. But this they're going to. That's why one of the things I want to do on the show with you is sort of manage expectations. What looks to be a slight win
Mhm.
or because we're going to talk about the EPA case next. And it looks on paper to be a slight win. Like when I saw the headline, I was like, that's weird. This Supreme Court is siding with the EPA about regulating carbon emission or something like that. That sounds weird. And then when you really dig into it, which is what we're going to do here, you're like, oh, that's not of a good as a result as I thought it was going to be.
Mhm.
And we'll talk about that next. Anything else on the gun case? Then we'll turn it over. We'll start bouncing it around on the EPA ruling.
No, I think like you said, we're really discussing it in the middle of the
Yeah.
process. And it is, there wasn't as if there was an order that talked about how the justices really felt about this issue. It was just they felt like that particular judgment wasn't in line with the law that they had already created,
Yeah.
but that what didn't mean that as it changes on the lower court, they may take it up again and, as you say, like, gut it.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah,
that's why
yeah,
we keep talking on it.
yeah, on our viewers and listeners, it is not uncommon for an appellate court or a Supreme Court to remand or send back a case to the lower court, the trial court, with instructions on what to do. Hey, it looks like you missed analyzing it under the state constitution, or hey, it looks like you missed our most recent precedent. How does that map onto your decision making now that we're telling you to do that? It may end up in the same place, or they might, by the trial judge, they might say, well, yeah, okay, or they might say, oh, well, under this and the analysis there, then we think. But this is them telling them without rule, because remember, when I say remember, that's just a shorthand way for me to transition my thought. Nobody has to remember it. That's why we're doing YouTube. But but the Supreme Court is a court of last resort, and it's not a trial court level. It has to make its decisions based on a factual record developed at the trial court level below. So some people might be thinking, well, just skip a step, just make the ruling. You know where this is going, Popok, for the Supreme Court. And they may well know where it's going, but it has to still jump through all of these procedural hoops in developing the record. Now, sometimes when this United States Supreme Court is impatient and wants to set new law, it ignores the record. It actually says out loud in oral argument, let's not get bogged down in the facts. When you hear this Supreme Court during oral argument, and we'll do some of them here on Unprecedented, say, let's not get bogged down in the facts, run for the exits, because that means they're going to start legislating from the bench, creating new law that's untethered to the Constitution or to any act of Congress. They're just going to make it up. That's
Mhm.
what let's not talk about the facts because they're very confusing or they're very unique. Like, yeah, well, you're an appellate court. You're supposed to be talking about the facts on appeal. So
Mhm.
that's a little trick of the United States Supreme Court and the MAGA alt right on there
Mhm.
that we're continuing to follow. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.